Do you have a thirst for adventure? Do you enjoy delving into forgotten ruins, unlocking long-lost secrets and crafting artifacts of immense power? Are you below average height and take pride in your magnificent facial hair? If the answer to any of those questions was yes, then your perfect game may well be Return to Moria, a title which brings a new spin on the Lord of the Rings franchise. But unlike typical licensed games, this isn't your run-of-the-mill action-adventure. No, this is an open-world survival crafting game, a genre that, if I'm being nice, I might call inconsistent and experimental. Some will love the style, some will simply hate it. So it seems surprising for one of the biggest IPs around to take a gamble on this genre. But you know, I think it could be a great move. And it just might spell out some exciting things for other franchises we know and love. Let's talk about Lord of the Rings, Return to Moria, and how this game could open the door to a new generation of unique licensed games. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk a bit about the game. What is it? Who is it for? And why should you be interested even if you absolutely despise survival games? So the cliff notes go as follows. You're a dwarf, a strapping, wanderlust-stricken dwarf, who's at the head of an expedition seeking treasure and spoils from the dwarven motherland. Forget the Fellowship of the Ring, these folks are the Fellowship of the Bling. You've been sent on this journey by Mr. Gimli Lockbearer, yes, the very same. And the land you'll be exploring is the infamous Moria, also known as the Khazad-dûm or Dwaradelf, if you're a smartass who's read the books. It's set in the 4th Age, i.e. after the big bad Sauron has met his big bad end. Aragorn sits atop the throne of Gondor. Hobbits, elves and wizards alike have set sail for distant lands, and so begins the Age of Man. Though that name may need a bit of tweaking because it's clearly a very important time for dwarven folk too. They're wanting to take back control and rekindle the glory days of old. So for fans of Tolkien, it's an interesting premise. The great evil of the land has already been defeated. Now it's time to rebuild and take care of any last minor threats that still scurry around in its recesses. So the story is appealing. And of course, it has dwarves and treasure, which are 2 more big ticks on my end. There's a reason I've logged over 500 hours in Deep Rock Galactic. But this is before I've even talked about the real draw, the game itself. So, the world around you is the sprawling kingdom of Moria. But here's the kicker. It's procedurally generated. No 2 adventures will ever be alike. You can play on your own and have a wild old time digging away and exploring, and then invite a few friends for a co-op session, and the world will be completely different. It's a bold move, but an exciting one, and that's just the beginning. The whole thing revolves around the age-old survival game loop. You'll gather resources, build outposts, research and craft upgrades, equip yourself, explore deeper, uncover powerful artifacts, and use them against the evils and terrors that inhabit your people's former home. And there's a lot of dangers prowling the depths. Sauron may be gone, but the orcs are still running amok, and there are even greater threats you'll surely cross paths with. You see, mining is noisy work and will draw the attention of any nasties lurking about, as will those torches you had to set up to illuminate the path. There'll be a constant battle of risk and reward which will punish greedy players. And much like the writer of this script, survival games players just love being punished. So, there's a lot to like here, for fans of the genre and for fans of Lord of the Rings, and in fact for anyone who simply likes a good adventure. It's even got the most comprehensive dwarf character creator the world has ever seen. Not a feature I've ever attached to a game before, but hey, if you've got it, flaunt it. Now, survival games aren't really something you just stumble into. And whilst its publishers have a lot of experience with the likes of 7 Days to Die and Stranded Deep, developers' free-range games don't have that same pedigree. They provided some help on Oddworld Soulstorm and the Callisto Protocol, and they've made a few games of their own too, like Spelldrifter and Rube Goldberg Workshop. But these definitely aren't survival games. In fact, there's probably no greater degree of separation between this and this. Yet they look like they're taking their whole new venture seriously. Researching mineral properties, holding book clubs, and enlisting Middle-earth experts to help them draft new Khazad-dûm phrases based on Tolkien's own language writings. They're going the whole 9 yards to make this as authentic as they can. But it does beg the question, why a survival game? Why such a divisive genre? It's a style of game that just doesn't suit IP titles, and the Lord of the Rings franchise is no stranger to good video game adaptations. Given Tolkien is basically the grandfather of fantasy, and we gamers love our sword and sorcery tropes, it's no surprise that these were some of the first titles around. There was War in Middle-earth, Riders of Rohan, and Shadows of Mordor. No. Shadows of Mordor. The 80s one. Shadows of Mordor, Game 2 of Lord of the Rings, if you want the full title. Ugh. These early examples saw a healthy mix of text adventure, role-playing and strategy, scratching an itch for Tolkien fans who owned a computer. Then the 3D age came along. The films happened, and we got even more games. The Fellowship of the Ring, which wasn't related to the film, and the Two Towers, which was. It was a confusing time, but a great one. There was the War of the Ring, Battle for Middle-earth, War in the North. The games also got Lego-fied. Then they got the Assassin's Creed treatment. There were more genres than you could shake a sting at. RTS, TBS, CCG, MMO, RPG. If there was a combination of 3 letters that made up a genre, you could bet a shiny caster that there was a Lord of the Rings game. Except FPS. Frodo doesn't have a gun, don't be silly. But there were no survival games. The genre existed, but it kept itself hidden away like a feral goblin in the depths of Dwarrowdelf. The genre just didn't have the wide market appeal that, say, an action-adventure game had. And that was the go-to when an IP wanted to make a video game for their franchise. Take the story, cast, and recognisable properties from a big show or movie, and insert it into a tried and tested formula. Action-adventure was a safe bet. Maybe there's some light platforming, or a few puzzles. If the devs wanted to go a bit crazy, they might throw in some mild RPG elements. That's not to say there weren't developers branching out, making a strategy game or an RPG here or there, but this was almost always the typical starting point. They wanted their games to be accessible, simple and universal, and they were usually just good enough to be worth playing, if you were a fan of the franchise. It worked for Star Wars, it worked for Harry Potter, and Game of Thrones, and Marvel, and DC, and pretty much every big cinematic blockbuster that came out in the 21st century. These games were secure. Stick to the script, and the game would make revenue. But this isn't safe. Survival games are not safe. They are volatile and experimental. From every one that works, there are scores that fail and infuriate. They're built around finicky building systems with grinding resources, an intrinsic part of the gameplay loop. Jank and goofiness is front and center of even the most polished titles. So why are they making this game anyway? Why not do like all the other licensed games and play it safe? Well, there's no easy answer. But it seems like they aren't making this for a quick buck. They want to build something more. I dare say they might even be respecting their audience as fans of a franchise, rather than easy marks who'll buy anything with a big name slapped on it. And I feel like I've gotten ahead of myself once more. I'm making it seem like survival games are simply a miserable affair. That's not true at all. I love the genre. Over a few choice titles, I spent thousands of hours punching rocks and slapping trees. Some might call that a waste of time, and they're probably right. But I'm not alone. The genre has found its audience. Obviously the heavy hitters like Minecraft have become household names, but there are loads that have brought in players from outside the usual survival game target. Subnautica, Valheim, The Forest, 7 Days, Don't Starve, Ark, Raft, the list goes on and on. Furthermore, I'm making it sound like Return to Moria is doing something groundbreaking by taking an IP and giving it the survival game treatment, but that has been done before too, you know. The obvious example is Conan Exiles. This did exactly what Return to Moria is attempting. Take a rich fantasy world, fill it with environmental storytelling, drip-feed lore and references across the land. The players don't play as leading roles, but minor characters, spinning their own tale. But to do that, you have to fudge the experience a bit. In your head, you're an indomitable warrior, destroyer of worlds, crusher of enemies, but the reality isn't quite like that. And that's pretty much true for every survival game. Even the better-looking ones will have their rough edges. It makes it possibly the worst genre to show off a high-profile IP. But there's another side to it. Yes, these games have their imperfections, but they can also have their upsides. Sure, Conan Exiles may feature a lot of silliness and nakedness, but it puts you front and center in a world that is dangerous and unforgiving. You get immersed. You are a part of this world. For a fan of a franchise, that's about as good as it gets, and certainly not something that comes with your typical action-adventure movie tie-in game. Where survival games were once the go-to of smaller developers, bigger and more reputable names are stepping up to the plate. Obsidian had a go at the formula with Grounded. Funcom are making a title set in the Dune universe. And even Blizzard have a hush-hush survival game project in the works called Odyssey. Bigger teams are coming along looking to make things that capture the essence of a survival crafting game, without the ugliness and the goofiness. I started out this video by alluding to some grand future of survival games and licensed properties resting solely on Return to Moria. But that's not really true. There's a lot of games gunning for the title of the future of the genre, but if Return to Moria does enough right, it might mean big things. In the past, big franchise names would get their feet wet in the video game world with a pretty unimaginative action-adventure game. But what if they saw this and thought, hey, let's give that a go. No more lazy run-of-the-mill titles, but handcrafted, intricate worlds where we could immerse ourselves completely and entirely. The genre might not be for everyone, but you set one of these in the universe of Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, Star Wars, Alien, and we could look past all those imperfections. If it means the chance of creating our own story in these rich worlds we know, love and crave. Okay, let's not kid ourselves. Even if Return to Moria is a Game of the Year contender, there's not suddenly going to be a deluge of open-world survival crafting titles in every conceivable universe. But maybe, between this and June, another developer might try something similar. And then, there might be another. This game isn't going to cause an industry-wide shift, but over the course of a few years, it might be looked back on as a trendsetter. Honestly, that's a future I'd love to see. Well thought out games that have depth and purpose. Titles that are complex, but also fun to play with friends. If there's a future for Lord of the Rings in video games, I want it to be like this, not like whatever the hell Gollum was supposed to be. So this could be the first stepping stone in a very exciting future for both fans of survival games and those of big sci-fi and fantasy franchises. But only if the game ends up being good. So please Return to Moria. Please be good. Otherwise, I'll have to make this video again in 6 months and I'll be putting all my hope in June Awakening. Oh God, I hope it doesn't come to that.